Hi, welcome to the OHMazing Way podcast. My name is Beth Reese, and I'm the creator, founder of Yogini's Yoga for Youth, and the host of the podcast. And thank you for joining us and dropping in and listening today. Today is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and I have the OHMazing Danielle Etter here with me. Hi, Danielle. How are you today?
I'm good, Beth. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. And thank you so much for your generosity in being with us today and talking about eating disorders and looking at how they can come about, what we can look for and how to prevent them. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, my pleasure.
Yeah, and so we're going to go ahead and start as we often do and take a
Okay.
couple breaths together and just really help us, like I'd like to say, put aside the spilt milk of the day and really drop in and get present with each other. And for those of
Okay.
you out there listening, wherever you are, just really take this time to practice this breath and be with us. And then as we continue with the conversation, continue to pull towards yourself and really listen for what in the conversation resonates with you, how you can share it, what you can take, and as they say, pay forward and offer to someone else. So wherever you are, find a comfortable sitting position. And so I always sit sort of crisscross yoga sauce, even in my office chair. So I'm going to uncross my legs and hands and rest my hands on my lap. Now, if you're driving, don't rest your hands on your lap. And if it's available to you, softly close your eyes. And if you don't want to close your eyes, perhaps lower your gaze and just find something around you to softly focus on. And from there, let's shift our breath to breathing in through our nose and just breathe in nice and deeply. Perhaps imagine you're smelling a beautiful flower power. And exhale nice and slowly. If you want, out of your mouth with a slight ah, that ah is also calming. And again, breathe in through your nose. Imagine smelling something amazing. And that's nice to do when we imagine we're smelling something. We breathe in more expansively and more deeply. And as you exhale, let your shoulders soften, your face soften. Let your eyes soften in their socket. And one last breath, breathing in, perhaps feeling your belly grow big like a birthday balloon. And let's breathe out with a nice ah. And softly flutter your eyes open. Great. Thanks for dropping in with us. And know that, those 3 breaths are available to do throughout the day. When I was head of a school, I used to do them every time I walked in and out of a door, just to prepare myself for whatever was next. It's a great way to start a meeting, start a conversation with someone like Danielle and I and you today. So feel free to grab on to just grabbing 3 breaths to get present anytime. So today's a big day. I'm actually sharing a story publicly that I haven't shared before about my own adventure of having an eating disorder and then learning how that's extended into my immediate and extended family. And so that is in part how I met Danielle. And I'll tell a bit more about the trail to meeting Danielle. But what I want to say about Danielle in the first meeting with her is this: Danielle, you have this like joyful, connective way of being with people. And it is, in fact, my daughter, Grace. I have her permission to say that, to say her name and share her story. And she's 12. And she just loves you. And what I get is that when you're with her, she feels heard and supported. So thank you for that.
Of course. It's really an honor to meet with people.
I get that. I get that about you. So let me share with our listeners a little bit about your awesome self. And so Danielle has her master's and is a licensed professional counselor. She has a private practice in Houston and is a certified eating disorder specialist. She's been treating clients with eating disorders for a decade. Her career as a therapist began at the Renfrew Center in Connecticut. She enjoys working with clients individually and in conjunction with their families and other providers. She has experience working with male and female clients ages 12 and older. Danielle believes that supportive client-therapist relationships are the key to successful therapy. And like, I really get that because I also feel, and when we would come in, right, I always came in for a few minutes to hang out and talk. And I always felt really that it wasn't just Grace getting support, Danielle, but that you were really supporting us as a team and as a family. And I really always appreciate and still do appreciate that about you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll get to that, all of that amazingness in a moment. And so to put some of this in context, Danielle and I agreed that this would be a great space for me to share a little bit about my history. And I'll try to do that really succinctly so we can get to our expert. So in high school, my senior year in high school, I think my boyfriend and I broke up, and that can be just tragic, and it can really feel awful. And I didn't eat, or I ate very little for about a week in my state of depression. And then after that, it became kind of hard to eat. And then after that, I noticed that some people were noticing that so in a short period of time, I probably lost like 20 pounds. And so then I noticed, and it really, some of this became clear to me in thinking about sharing this story. So in a short period of time, I then noticed that some people were noticing, and I was getting some attention from having lost the weight. And some of it was positive. And there were two people in my life, my boyfriend, who we got back together. And then my very best friend, Michelle, hi Michelle, who were then commenting like, something's not right here. Like, I can see your ribs, right? And then it was interesting, the people in my life, the people very, very close to me, like under my own roof, who weren't noticing. And I say that without judgment, right? People are busy, and know that one of my like winning ways of being is like, I'm always great, right? Like everything's great. I'm always, and I'm really like aware of this and working on it, but I'm always making lemonade out of lemons, right? Mm-hmm. So even in so that's just also something to notice. So it was actually my vice principal at my school who noticed and had me start to come to his office. And Mr. Maury, I'm going to come find you and thank you one day, like today. And so he was the one who really put his foot down and was like, you're going to start coming to my office every morning and eating. Okay. So that's high school. I go to college. So I'm eating, but then what I'm doing is I'm calculating exactly my calories and working out to make sure I'm working out the same calories. Now, I didn't think that was an eating disorder. And Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that still falls in the realm of a challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So eventually, so I think really, and so all of this is happening, and but I'm stronger, basically healthy. And then at some point I started to notice that when I didn't eat, I was a total witch. Mm-hmm. I was, hangry and mean. And there was a ripple effect in my life of how that happened, of what happened then to the people I love, that they would get, I would lash out, right? It's not a lot of fun to be around someone who's lashing out. So I started to notice that was related to me not eating. And then I started to notice, so then all of this like curiosity and awareness for me started. And I never had formal treatment. I think I would have gotten through this much quicker if I had, Danielle. Mm-hmm. And then eventually just started really noticing and grew in my body awareness of so it almost became that I started eating healthy, not so much for me, but for the people around me, right? So that I could like be my best version of me. And interestingly enough, I think that has to some degree continued in my life as a parent. And Danielle and I talked about this even recently, that even before this happened, that Grace made us aware of this. Like I'm someone who like, I could go all day without eating. And I know that that's not healthy. So I eat because I know my body needs fuel. And then I purposefully make sure I'm eating around my kids so they see me eat. And again, I could eat like a hard-boiled egg and avocado and be fine, and that's fine. And with an awareness of my own eating issues, right, I try to model, make sure they see me eating properly. So that's kind of been a lifetime adventure for me. And when I do get down and depressed, I have to be really careful to notice. I choose to be careful to notice how that is showing up for me and make sure I'm nourishing myself properly, even if it's with like starting the day off with a protein shake. So all of that, and then flash back maybe 2 months ago, I noticed that my daughter, Grace, she very much has my build, and very much had that like young person, just kind of body before, hormones, and, very strong and built very differently than some of her friends who are like very super skinny, right? So Danielle, how would you describe? There's like super, smaller build kids and then like medium-sized kids like me.
Right. There's people who have a smaller frame and those who have a more medium, athletically built frame. And yes, and I think you and Grace fall into the medium frame athletic category. You're strong.
Yeah,
yeah.
we are.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And with that, I and also know, so I've been very careful about my languaging with my kids, and I never try to say things like, and this is just for me, like, oh, you look so pretty and that, and not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. And for me, again, with this history, I'm always trying to comment on like you look strong today, or I see, that, just, I'm not really sure what I'm trying to say there. So I'll move on. In any case, so I did start to notice about 2 months ago that Grace's body was changing. And I remember in that moment going, either her hormones are kicking in a different way, and that's actually what I thought. And then I also said to myself, Beth, get curious with her. And I remember saying to her, like, you look really strong, Grace. What's changing in your life? And I remember her saying like, yeah, PE is going really well, or PF at her school. And I was like, all right. But I remember then still saying to myself, okay, Beth, you pay attention now, as if I wasn't before, like really. And it was really probably very interesting. Within, I think, 36 hours of that moment, she came to me one night and asked if she could talk to me. And she said, remember when you shared with me, and I've been very transparent with my kids about my life. And she said, remember, and here's a moment of why I'm glad I have been. Remember you shared with me you had an eating disorder in high school? Yes. How did that feel for you? And I thought, my stomach dropped. And I said, well, and I shared with her some things, and I said, so tell me more. Why are you asking? And she then proceeded to share with me that she had recently gone 3 days without eating. That what she said, a couple of things she said was, it's like there's this like other personality I have. Like, she's like, I know that I'm great. I know that I'm strong and I look good, which I love. She's like, but there's this other thing, like this other personality that, and I often joke that like the negative voice in my head, I call Voldemort. She's like, you have Voldemort. She's like, it's like I have my own Voldemort lately that's been telling me like I shouldn't eat and I don't want to eat and all this stuff. And like, I'm sitting with her, and she actually had told her best friend, and her best friend said, if you don't tell your mom, I'm going to. And what I just want to say, and I've thanked her friend and her friend's mom. And what I love is that her friend has my phone number. So her friend could have done that. But her friend said, your mom will understand. You need to tell her. So then Grace also said, she was like, I get this voice isn't me. But it's there, and I'm really struggling to to not listen to it. Like it's gotten to the place where it's just like, I feel like it's taking over. And I was at a recent retreat where they talked about there's like the life living through you and it's not you. So it's like all of like society and culture and social media and all the external things around us that impact us. So I think, so that's, I get what she was saying. And so I was like, and then she said, and Mom, what you have to know is this isn't about you. There's nothing you could have done. Okay. She was actually 11 at the time. And I remember thinking, like, a part of me was like, oh, well, what are you saying that for? Like, I'm so selfish. And then I told my oldest daughter, Jordan said, yeah, well, Mom, what you have to get is if you make this about you, you're taking away her power to empower her to manage and be strong about this. So I have all these like strong people around me. So then comes in Danielle, and we've been working with Danielle, and Grace is doing amazing. Now, the next thing I just want to say in terms of, and Danielle has shared resources with me and a book, which Grace read the book, and we just have these beautiful open conversations about what's going on. And then meanwhile, a few weeks ago, I interviewed my niece, Victoria, for a podcast because she's doing some research and presenting to Congress, slacker, about nutrition and eating and well-being. And in the context of my conversation with her, she shared with me that she has struggled, and I have her permission, she has struggled with eating issues. And actually the next podcast, friends, that will be launched will be my conversation with Victoria. And so, yeah, like there you have it, 2 generations at least. Then, my dear niece, and seeing, it's just, Danielle, I just feel like it's so prevalent, eating disorders and body images and people who are very young, and not just females, males too. Right. And so I really just want to pause my story there. And thank you all for listening. I feel really honored to get to share that, and grateful. And really want to hear, from our expert, like, what are some things, any comments you have about like what I said and what I shared, and then things we might look for, risk factors. So Danielle, I really just want to hand you that, baton and take us to understand these challenges better.
Yeah. So it's brave of you to share that story, I think. And I don't think enough parents talk to their kids about their own personal struggles with eating and body image and self-esteem. So I think that you really created an awesome space for your kid. And what you were referring to when you said Voldemort is yes. Like that nasty voice.
Yes.
What we call that is externalizing the eating disorder, right? So you have, or externalizing a negative voice. So what you've done there is you've separated your kid from her eating disorder. And that's empowering because you don't have to make it a part of you necessarily. Yeah, so wow. That's actually pretty important. And
if I can just say, and part of how that's happened is in my own growth and struggles of having that voice in my head that's like, as an entrepreneur, like, you can't do this, you right. suck today, whatever it is. So as I've named it, and so I just, like I said, I just try, or when I blow up at my kids, right? Because as I know, I'm like, mindful mom, but it does happen.
Sure.
But then I come back and I unpack for them, like, these are the body sensations I had, and I'm really working on catching them, and I've made huge progress. But part of that is like, wow, today I can see that Voldemort was really loud, and, and let's think about some things I can do when Voldemort's really loud. So, and I share that with them to like lay a groundwork for them to have access to that. So in this case, and I just want to say, not to pat myself on the back, but for people listening, that unpacking and narrating what my life experience has been laid a groundwork or space for grace to step into and get and then share back to me.
Yes. So what you're doing is you're naming feelings and telling her how to identify feelings, because sometimes when we don't know the name of a particular feeling, we can talk about the sensation in our body, and we can then say, okay, if I feel tightness in my chest, it might be that I'm feeling anxiety, right? For instance, right? So if I'm feeling a pit in my stomach, I might be angry or nervous, or, so that's really important. And you're also prompting her to use coping skills in that moment, right? So, okay, let's talk about a way that I can handle this functionally, this feeling functionally, and not lash out. And yeah, so those are two really important factors in managing your feelings.
Great, great. And so in thinking about, maybe it's I don't know if there's anything you want to say about like the family nature of it, and also thinking about, what to be looking for.
Okay, so let me talk about what to look for, because the family nature of it will come into it. I'll talk about that in what to do, how we sort of treat this, right? Okay, so, you talked about with your story that there were changes. So dietary changes are really important to notice. You might notice your kid, I'm going to use the word kid, but it could be anybody, right? It doesn't have to be a kid. It could be an adult. So changes in dietary habits, calorie restriction, cutting out entire food groups like starches or proteins, so your kid might come to you and say, I want to be a vegetarian, or I want to be a vegan all of a sudden. That's something to pay attention to. Kids saying, I want to do a fast or a cleanse. Well, that could be eating disorder motivated. So also notice an increase in exercise or excessive exercise. And so unless you're an athlete, exercising for multiple hours a day is probably excessive. And in term,
sorry, so two things. One, in high school, what I started eating literally for 3 months, and I have friends who are going to crack up remembering this, or sort of crack up, was popcorn and Diet Coke.
Yeah.
For months. What a balanced diet.
What a balanced diet. Yes.
The other thing you're talking about exercise, and one of the things I thought was interesting and so spot on was you asked us to make sure to watch how much Grace was exercising, and that exercise was not to be used for weight management.
Right.
That for me was like brilliant.
Right. Because we want to use it for well-being. And for a child, they do not need weight management most of the time. They're growing. So I really want to stress that exercise really needs to be used for a sense of well-being, to reduce your stress level. You don't want to use it as a means of, weight control.
Awesome. So anything else? You've given us great tips for what to look for.
Yes. So just like in your case, rapid weight loss, or weight gain, paying attention to his or her behaviors at meal times. So eating really slowly, or cutting the food up into tiny pieces, having to chew a certain number of times. Those are what we call food rituals, and they're important to pay attention to. You might notice large amounts of food missing, or your child hiding food in their bedroom. That's something I hear pretty regularly. That's something definitely to look out for. Your child disappearing to the restroom after meals, or taking a shower shortly after eating. Also being isolated after meals. That's what I think is really important to look for. And then you have just an increased attention on weight or size or shape. Maybe your child is starting to talk about how he or she dislikes these different parts of his or her body. And that's important to listen to. Emotionally, the kid might be more isolated and depressed and anxious, and that's a function of the eating disorder and what it does to your brain. So yeah, these are things that are really important to look for. I will say that just in the case of in the case of different kinds of eating disorders, the symptoms of anorexia that are maybe lesser known are cold intolerance. So your kid might want to wear a jacket or sweater all the time, even if it's as hot as it is in Houston, right? Wanting to wear a jacket all the time, dizziness, irritability, fatigue. Those are all signs of malnutrition. So what scares me the most, to be honest, about anorexia and bulimia are the medical complications that come with this. So, unstable electrolytes, particularly potassium and sodium, they can cause cardiac complications. So that's really scary. Maybe your daughter's period is irregular or she loses it altogether. That's another symptom that's really scary. Additionally, their vital signs being abnormal, that's something to pay attention to. And that happens with anorexia and bulimia. So with bulimia, another thing to notice is they might look like they have a swollen jaw, and that's actually the parotid glands swelling from purging. They also might have calluses on the back of their hands from self-induced vomiting, or have a sore throat. So
Danielle,
those are really scary.
Yeah, absolutely. So is that the key? I mean, in my, my knowledge base, when I think about anorexia and bulimia, one of the key differences for me is that bulimia is when you're purging. Is that the difference, or any other distinctions to be made between the two?
So with bulimia, you'll have a binge and then a purge. It is possible to have what they call anorexia purge type. And so you remember that with bulimia, you will have a binge and a purge. And with anorexia, it's really more restrictive. You can still purge with anorexia though, or excessively exercise. So bulimia is either, and when I say purge, it can be any sort of compensatory behavior, like excessive exercise or laxatives or ipecac, anything like that you're using as a compensatory behavior to sort of balance out the calories.
Yeah. Great. And I also remember what was so great, and when you were talking about how these things affect the body and the brain. And I remember about this time too that Grace was very lethargic and tired, and at times she said she was dizzy, and I'm always like, are you drinking enough water? Like, that's right. My first go-to. And I remember that I also remember one of our first visits with you. You said something about, and I loved your language was very like loving and direct with her. And it was like, Grace, you're growing and you're smart, and this will impact your brain. And then Grace said, well, I want to be a pediatric surgeon when I grow up. And you were just like, well, then you don't have time to be like, have this. I mean, you said something playful, right? It was like, your brain really needs food. So yes, but it also was a way that, for you to connect with her in a way that was her would make sense, and then help her see like, this is really important. Yeah,
right.
So thank you.
Right.
But yeah, how it does affect our brain and our body in ways we maybe don't imagine.
Right. One other thing I will say is that binge eating disorder, which is an eating disorder that has recently been recognized, although it's existed forever, that also carries risks as well, like gastric rupture or hypertension or diabetes. And so sometimes when, I know there's a lot of emphasis placed on the childhood obesity sort of epidemic, but it could be binge eating disorder as well. So I just want to point that out so parents are aware of that.
And any, what would we look for, Danielle, with the difference between a child who's maybe overweight or having a binge eating experience?
So that's a good question. I would say that people who are binging normally do it in isolation. So if you're noticing a large amount of food going missing, but you're not seeing your child eat it in front of you, that might be a sign that they have sort of binge eating or are compulsively eating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And so, Danielle, what are some of the risk factors that might be associated with this?
So I want to dispel the myth that parents cause eating disorders, because
Thank you.
research says that they do not. There are a number of factors. It's such a, it sort of looks like a perfect storm when you take a look at everyone's, each person's unique eating disorder development. So it's not caused by one factor, but rather a number of factors. So genetics, a family member who has a history of an eating disorder, right? So just like you said, you had an eating disorder, and so genetically, you may have passed that down to your daughter. Biochemically, there's actually, I think that, so research has said that there's actually different levels of neurotransmitters in people who have eating disorders. So there's really a biochemical component. Inherited traits like temperament, like low stress tolerance, low distress tolerance, comorbid mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, things like that. And then we have the psychological traits that I think are so important in paying attention to risk factors. So that would be something like perfectionism, risk avoidance, low self-esteem, impulsivity. Those things are, people will ask me, what kinds of people develop eating disorders? And that's such an interesting question. And I said, well, it doesn't really matter what kind of, the outside does not matter, the race, the religion, the gender. It's mostly those psychological traits that bind them. Perfectionism, impulsivity, those things, rigidity, those factors are almost always present when I see someone with an eating disorder. So there's this saying that genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger, right? So environmental factors like abuse or trauma or bullying or a chaotic family dynamic, those things are also risk factors. They don't necessarily cause them alone, but they can absolutely activate and trigger an eating disorder.
Yeah, and one of the things we uncovered in the case of Grace was some name calling to her about being fat, right. Some questions about how that was being managed at school, and then also something you and I spoke about when we spoke privately, the kind of the conversations that she and some of her friends were having. And I see these conversations happening apparently with very young people in the tween stages and adults, right? And the conversations around how you look, what you weigh, like that number. And so even that, like, Grace didn't want to eat. Part of her challenge was not wanting to eat in front of people. And I'd also, like, and her teacher became really part of our team, which also, it was so, I love the way you and I talked about, like, how do we create a team to support Grace? Anything you want to say about, again, across the ages, about the way we talk about body image and that weight number, just anything about that?
Yeah, so I will say that, yes, I do. I don't talk to my friends about my weight. I've never told them what I weigh. I think that's sort of a bizarre conversation. That's something for you and your doctor. That's really only when it's relevant. So I would just say to any kids or any parents, if you hear your kid talking about what they weigh to a friend, that's a red flag. We don't talk about that kind of stuff with our friends. Not that it's bad, but that it's irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really matter.
Right. It's the way our pull to gravity, right? Like the
Yes.
numbers, and then how much muscle and all of that. Like there's so many factors, right? And
So many factors.
Yeah.
So many factors. And I also think unless you're going to say something positive about how somebody looks, don't say anything. And even when you say something positive, like you were getting a lot of attention when you started losing weight, be mindful of that, because someone might be struggling, and it's not always helpful to tell someone, "Oh, look at you, you lost so much weight. You look so thin." That's not always a good thing. So when I'll say to my clients when they come in, I'll say, "You've lost weight," and sometimes they'll say, "Thank you." And I'll say, no, that wasn't a compliment. That was an observation, right? Because sometimes it's indicative of an illness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Well, so much more to cover. And so we're going to take a break. And in the second half, we are going to, Danielle's going to share with us, if you start to notice some of these elements, these traits, and you're aware of some of these risk factors, and you're starting to put one and one together, what you can do and how to prevent eating disorders, body image issues, and those sorts of things. So we will be right back. And actually, Grace is going to hop in and share with us a little bit about Yogenius Yoga for Youth. So thanks, Grace.